Welcome to the Radical Rhythm Podcast. This has been created for those of us that love radical women who live perhaps by the rules, but also question and challenge the status quo. We want more from our lives, to enjoy our sexuality, to explore radical thought, and to celebrate women who have lived and continue to live unconventional lives. Hi, I'm Dr. Toni Baer, sexologist, educator, activist, and definitely a radical woman. Thank you for joining me as I share stories of women challenging the status quo and living life to the fullest. Join me as we unapologetically march to the beat of a different drummer together. Welcome to the Radical Rhythm Podcast. I am thrilled to have a new guest in season 2 with us, Jenny Johnson. Jenny, there's such an interesting story of where we met and our background together, but I'm going to let you introduce yourself today the way you want to, and then I'm going to have fun asking you lots of questions.
Okay, I'm so happy to be here on this podcast. My name is Jenny Johnson, and I'm a poet, and I teach at West Virginia University, and I have a book, and it's called In Full Velvets, and I'm working on a second collection of poems. And maybe Toni, do you want to say more about how we've met?
Sure. We met in a sex library in Indiana. And in fact, one of the organizations, a domestic violence center that I'm on their board, they just introduced me that way as here's Dr. Toni, and she lives in a sex library. Evidently, I must beam in from there via Zoom a lot, but I love saying that, right? So, Jenny, we met at this sex library, and I'm just thrilled that you are one of two of the first scholars in residence at the Carter Johnson Leather Library and Collection. And to start this program at the library with you is a thrill. And that's why I had to have you on the program today, because your poetry is hot and you're hot. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who want to meet you.
Well, yeah, I don't even know where to go from there, but it's such an honor to be a scholar in residence at the Carter Johnson Library, and anyone who can find their way to Evansville. It was a dream to get to spend time in that collection. So I'm really honored.
And I'm thinking not many people have ever stayed in a library, like slept in a library.
Mm-hmm.
It's truly an amazing experience being the scholar in residence um, at that facility. So when we were there, we were checking out the books and the magazines and the artwork. Now that you're somewhere else, what kind of left with you? Like, what did you see or do that has left like an imprint upon you?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm still synthesizing the experience of being in the library. I took a lot of notes, I made a lot of recordings, and I took a lot of photos. And I brought some books, because naturally what happens when you go to a library, you get some books. One of the things that's been staying with me is just that it's a library where I'm used to having worked in universities, and especially going into archives. There are libraries where you have to um, somebody takes your backpack and tells you you can only write with a pencil, and there are a lot of rules about how you're able to physically be with the materials. And at the Carter Johnson Library, one of the mottos is please touch. And that, just when I think about that, it just gives me chills. And I felt like while I was in the space, I just felt this whole different kind of permission to that touch meant not only to touch books that are leather bound, and that the oils of your fingers touch the books, but also to feel touched by all the different lives that have come through the library and all the different works that are held there, all of those different. So I just felt this like, it felt like it was a place that just made me think about community, and different communities too. So yeah.
Yeah, it was such a special experience, and having you and Jules there, you're both the scholars during the first year of this program. And I remember very vividly picking you up at the airport in our drive back. And our conversation ended up by the time we got to the library about what the differentiation would be between a scholar and a poet, right? Like an artist in residence versus a scholar in residence. And my assumption, and you should never assume, right? Um, Being a professor at West Virginia University, having a doctorate, I saw you as the scholar in residence that I was picking up. And as we were coming back, you said, a lot of poets are artists in residence um, at different, libraries, museums, organizations. And I never thought about that before because professor, I thought scholar. Can you talk
Mhm.
a little bit about the artistry of poetry and how you bridge both worlds?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of it maybe is just that I think my practice, of how I engage with an archive and look at books and look at art, just feels a little wackier because I'm an artist. and
Mhm,
so um, and so whereas uh, like one kind of way of being in a library is to have a book and read it cover to cover. My way of being in a library might be that I stumble upon a phrase, or I'm like actually noticing like how something smells. I'm like really focused on looking at a piece of art for a long time, and then it sparks a poem that like a line, a sentence, an image, something I overhear that someone says. Any of those things um, could spark the art. And that to me just feels like, though I feel scholarly in my life and I'm in scholarly communities, I just also feel like I'm just an artist who gets sparked by things too.
mhm. Wow. Well, I was sparked by your book. I was given a copy of your book and I did look through, although I haven't spent a lot of time with it because I'm still waiting for you to sign it. So I didn't want to get intimate with the book yet, to make sure
Yes.
it was complete. And in your own work, can you, I mean, it's an assembly of a lot of different ideas. Is there anything that
Mhm.
kind of pulls it together in your anthology there? Would it be an anthology? I don't know. What would you
Yeah,
call
I
it? Your
call it like
collection?
a collection of poems, and it's I mean it's a book where I guess I think of poets as artists who are just very obsessive. And so I'm just like writing poems, and then later I'm like, wow, these are all speaking to each other because they're just themes that I'm interested in. Themes of desire, themes of the body, themes of um the erotic, of the natural world often sparks me for its sensuality. Um, Thinking about LGBT history and community. So overlaps between those themes, and yeah, that's kind of also like coursing through the book.
Mhm. Well, this whole program kind of centers on women who march to the beat of a different drum.
Hmm.
How do you fit that? I mean, from the moment I met you, I'm like, you're my people. Um, right? How does your poetry kind of fit into that characterization?
Yeah, well, I can actually tell you, like, the book is called In Full Velvet, and I was reading a book uh, um, called Biological Exuberance, which is about animal homosexuality and sexual diversity in the natural world. And it's just like a big kind of an encyclopedia of stuff that I felt like I had never come to know about that's going on in nature. And when I was reading it, I was reading about white-tailed deer, which are so common. I mean, who hasn't seen a white-tailed deer? Um, and I learned this fact that some white-tailed deer, uh, like that often we think of that there's like a time during mating season when bucks rub the velvet off the antlers of their they rub the
The
velvet
rack.
off when they're, yeah, the rack, right? And but but there are some deer, and I know I'm like anthropomorphizing here, to sort of say that they're like the queer deer. But there are some deer that skip out on that courting ritual, and they go off and they do their own thing, and their rack just stays very velvety, and they're called velvet horn deer, and they're just like and hunters often want to catch the white-tailed velvet horn deer because it's different than the rest. And I was really struck by this image of deer. I grew up in rural Virginia, and as a queer woman, I like identify as queer, or I call myself a dyke, or a lesbian. I felt as though it was just like kind of incredible to think about how much difference is going on in the natural world all the time, and that I'm an animal too, and that I'm being different in my ecosystem. And so yeah, so that's one thing that I think, that's one way that I could say the book and my work is thinking about moving to a different drum, that even in the title it's called In Full Velvet. So I was riffing on this idea of these deer that are different.
Right. Well, I had asked you earlier, and I was hoping that you could do a poem for us right now.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to ask you a little bit about being a poet in a university, centering on the erotic, right? So,
Yeah, happy to
yeah,
talk about it.
yeah.
Um,
So
so
pick something for us.
yeah, I'm gonna read something new, and this is on the this is on poets.org if you want to, anybody wants to go read it online. It's a poem called Petal, and I was reading a book by Emily Nagoski called Come As You Are, which is a book that's like that reframes how we think about the sex drive, and that rather than say that there is such thing as just a sex drive, she gets into how there's accelerators and brakes, and that everyone has a kind of more intricate machinery for what turns them on, and that there are things that rev you up, and then there are also, very importantly, things that are no's. And so so anyway, I was reading that, and then I started thinking about accelerators. I started thinking about what hits the pedal, and all the different things for anyone that can all the ways that there's like lots of different kinds of sensations. And so it's a kind of understated poem, but that was what was behind it. And that's why I called it Pedal. So I'm going to read it. Pedal. I have a friend who measures desire by stillness, who is most turned on by the person in the room who meditates without flinching. The librarian, too, in the manuscripts division, handling the patron who can't seem to stay seated, warns, I will serve you the smallest items first. As a knit sweater slides off a chair's back into a loose knot. All day, we could have watched clusters of blue-bottle gentians flexing their umbrellas open and shut as bumblebees submerged headfirst into one bloom after another. Dizzy subspaces, partially open paper dressing rooms, trying on things till they'd wrap themselves in a good dusting of pollen. Everywhere, intimate containers seemed to be in motion. The raised bed full of squash flowers, the black latex glove masking the bare hand ladling bowls of wedding soup for the lunch crowd. My quick pedal revved by the world.
Wow. Does your university know you write porn?
Well, they hired me. They knew what they were getting into when they hired a queer poet that writes into that thinks about desire.
Mhm.
Um,
That's
yeah.
beautiful. I love it. I love it. So, how do you balance this? I mean, I was at one time a bassist that played in rock bands, and I toured in the summer and, survived pretty much on SpaghettiOs and lived in the back of a van, right? And went to women's music festivals. And then I'd go back to academia in late August and, all the bricks in the ivy and returning to the stuffiness of the multisyllabic lecture, right? How do you bridge these two worlds?
Tony, I loved how you just described two different environments, because there is a way that I feel like academic institutions just feel more heady, like you're in your head and you're not in your body, versus the way I would imagine it feels to be playing music. Right?
Yeah,
Um,
with naked women dancing all over the place as you're up on stage and you play a fast song and people with their boobs, kind of, I don't want to say flapping because that's not very attractive, right? But bopping up and down, right?
yeah. Well, I, I mean, but the poems come from they come from life. They come from the everyday. They come from, having a conversation with a friend who says like, um, stillness turns her on, that's where poems come from that kind of like quotidian. And so I guess I I I love my job. I love teaching. And but I also just make sure that when I'm working on my work, I'm also finding ways to go on walks, to be connected to the people that spark me, and to like surround myself in the communities that also inspire me. So it's a balance. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So, do you have another one? Would you read one more
Yeah.
for us?
Yeah, I'm gonna
I
read
would
another
love
one.
that.
And if you want, I can talk about. I've been sometimes teaching uh, a short seminar on how to expand the erotic in poems, because one of the things that interests me is that the poet Audre Lorde, she has an essay called "Uses of the Erotic," and in it, she really takes the word erotic and makes us think about it as that the erotic, of course, can have to do with sex, but it also can just be about sensation and about, she uses the phrase fully feeling. Um, and that, and so I find that really exciting. And she even goes into how Eros can be a part of work. It can be a part of friendship. It can like extend, if we're fully feeling, that can extend into so many different parts of our lives. And so I find that really thrilling to think in this kind of more expansive way about the erotic. Not that not that I don't also am not also up for its sexual connotation, but I like the possibility, and also just that like what turns people on can be so dynamic and expansive too. So expansion is clearly a theme for me. And also in that essay, there's this moment, and this is getting me to my poem. It's a kind of heady essay, but there's this one moment where she talks about what she thinks of as her erotic root, this like kernel for her, and she describes this moment when when she was young, and there was this margarine packet, and she remembers um, taking her thumb and kneading this pellet of margarine, and then how the yellow kind of explodes through the margarine packet. Recommend reading it. I feel like I'm not doing the
Yeah.
best paraphrase.
Yeah. So,
That's
Audre Lorde, and what is the name of?
It's called Uses of the Erotic. You can find it online. You can hear her read it out loud online.
Fantastic.
And
I will put a link underneath this podcast so that people can look. And your
lovely.
book, of course.
So, I mean, that's a question I'm like extending this to everyone to ask yourself, if you were to think of a moment when you felt curious, free, joyful, or very much in your senses, um, as a young person, what would that be? Because I think those moments are connected to the kind of things we feel like saying yes to or feel excited about as adults. And so this poem I'm going to share was me thinking about that and trying to do this exercise. Um, and and I could probably do this exercise many times because there are lots of memories I have that would wake me up in my senses.
Right?
Um, but in this one, I'm thinking I'll just kind of spoil it a little bit. I'm thinking about a moment as a kid when I was on a long car trip and I had this hat and I was waving it out the car window. And the whole time I was waving it out the car window, there was some little voice in my head that was saying, "What if you let go of the hat? What if? What if?" And I mean, I knew I would then lose the hat. It would just blow away in the wind. But it was like this moment of kind of being on the cusp of of sensation and like kind of daring myself to do something. And that's what I thought of. And
Okay.
so I'm going to read this poem and it's called
Wow.
Submission. Submission. I can't remember ever not wanting this. Clinching a painter's cap out a car window, the one I chose as a kid to wear backwards, sun stunned in the back seat. So many numbing miles to go, the cap flapping, my fist tightening as it whipped and whirled and pirouetted in the wind. Above the brim in letters airbrushed were the words, "Let's get physical." Physical. A world whizzed by. A voice inside dared me to do it. Where it went when I let go, I didn't see, though I felt a fluttering as the hat was sucked up and back in the pummeling air, fast into the open mouth of a tunnel invisible beneath the bay. In this room where we're playing, my arms have been up for a while. I'm losing count of the smacks the falls make, how much pressure you've delivered to each of my shoulders. When you tear the top off a marigold, there are so many fine, loose strings. When I lose my grip this time, I meet the slap of your voice. Did I ask you to let go?
Wow. Wow. So, like I just see all these images, and your words are beautiful. So they just paint this picture, you know. And I was not one of those kids in school that liked poetry because I just didn't get it. I just don't
Mm-hmm.
think my my just personal development was ready to consume these images, and perhaps not enough life experience. I don't know. Do you find that students in your classes are loving this as much as I am right now?
Well, I do feel like poetry is just a place where you can try to give language to unspeakable feelings. It's hard. It seems like easier than it is sometimes. Like I think when I hear a poem I really love, I'm like, wow, that person made it look so easy. But it takes a ton of tinkering. Like a poem like that takes me months. But it's also thrilling when you find the words to name a feeling that you have. I mean, as a musician, have you had that feeling like singing songs or writing lyrics?
Yeah, I'm not a singer-songer. I'm not a
Okay.
songer-singer. I am a
Yeah.
bass player, so for
Right.
me, it's the thud and it's the
Oh.
vibration that goes from the feet all the way up. Now you have to realize I'm standing in front of a wall of amplifiers behind me, or I'm sitting on top of an amplifier that's vibrating. And I'm part of a team in a smoke filled room with lights blaring in our eyes, not being able to see a single thing out there other than my fellow musicians as I stand next to the drums and all I hear are the cymbals crashing in my ears. It's a whole different experience than what the audience has. You know?
Yeah, but talk about fully feeling. You just painted such a portrait of it. I just feel
Mm,
like I just dropped in to that space
yeah.
and and the like and the power of the of of being a part of that sonic um yeah, because I don't I'm not one that can play an instrument. And so there's a lot of respect I have for musicians.
As I do for poets, because there's no way I could do this, but I am totally appreciative of not only your art, but your scholarship and your friendship the most, Jenny.
Ah.
So thank you for being on the podcast today. I know a half an hour goes very quickly here, and I really appreciate you dropping in, and I'm hoping you'll drop in again.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Radical Rhythm podcast today. It has truly been my pleasure to invite guests and talk to you about my passion, the joy in our sexuality, and radical women who march to the beat of a different drum. If you'd like to work with me, Dr. Toni Baer, I have a community where I give seminars every month. I also have a coaching program, both group and individual, and also a course, a self-directed course, because it's all about experiencing the joy life has to offer. I'd love to work with you. Check out my link below, www.tonibaeredd.com. See you next week, and don't let anyone dim your shine.